The dim light of the hotel corridor stretched long shadows along the walls as Shungjai's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor. He held his phone loosely in his hand, glancing at the screen with practiced disinterest. Another call from her. His wife. He declined it without hesitation, the little vibration mocking him as it faded into silence. Outside, the Los Angeles night pulsed with distant sirens and the hum of passing cars, but inside Shungjai's world was muted, contained within the walls of Suite 906. He entered the room, closing the door with a soft, deliberate click, as if the act itself marked the separation between the life he had built and the one he had chosen to leave behind. Naomi was there, reclining against the luxurious cream couch, a silk robe draped over her shoulders. Her dark hair fell in waves, framing her sharp, startled eyes as they locked onto his. She smiled faintly, a mixture of nervous anticipation and something more, curiosity, longing. "I thought you might ignore me entirely," she said, voice low, almost teasing. Shungjai's lips curved in a subtle smirk. "I didn't think you'd mind," he replied, letting the words linger between them. He set his phone on the marble counter, out of sight, and ran a hand along his jawline, the tension of the evening evident in the taut muscles beneath his coat. The room smelled faintly of expensive cologne and vanilla from the scented candles Naomi had lit, a deliberate attempt to create warmth in the otherwise cold hotel suite. Naomi shifted slightly, her gaze trailing over him. "You always know how to make an entrance," she said, but there was a hint of something unsaid in her tone. Fear maybe. Or the weight of knowing she had stepped into a world far more dangerous than she could imagine. Shungjai's presence alone was enough to command attention, even without the rumors that surrounded him, the whispers of the Korean Mafia boss who moved through cities like a shadow, untouchable and precise. He moved closer, closing the space between them, and Naomi instinctively leaned back, though not entirely away. Shungjai's eyes caught hers, dark and unreadable, a storm hidden beneath calm. "Relax," he said, voice low, velvety but firm. "Tonight you're safe with me." Naomi's breath hitched slightly, a reaction he observed with quiet interest. She had stepped into this with her own choices, drawn to him despite the danger, despite the stories she had heard. He noted the tension in her shoulders, the subtle way her fingers fidgeted with the fabric of her robe. It was all small, insignificant movements, yet to Shungjai they spoke volumes. He had learned to read the language of fear and desire, power and vulnerability long ago. "I don't know why I keep doing this," Naomi murmured almost to herself. "But I can't seem to stay away." Shungjai's smirk widened slightly. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, letting his fingers trail down her cheek. "Neither can I," he said, the words deliberate, unhurried. "And that's the truth you need to accept if you're staying here." The tension in the room was palpable, thick as the scent of expensive whiskey. He poured into 2 glasses. He handed one to Naomi and she accepted it with a trembling hand, her eyes never leaving his. They sipped in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Naomi's mind raced, about her life, the choices that had brought her here, and the man before her who was both protector and danger intertwined. Outside the suite, the city's pulse continued, a reminder that the world moved on without pause, indifferent to the drama unfolding behind the hotel doors. Inside, Naomi felt suspended in a bubble of anticipation, aware that at any moment the fragile balance could shatter. She had learned over time that Shungjai's world was not forgiving, that one wrong step could endanger her beyond comprehension. And yet she stayed, because the pull between them was magnetic, impossible to resist. He leaned back against the counter, studying her as she sipped her drink. There was a faint bruise on her wrist, subtle but noticeable. "Trouble following you again?" he asked casually, though the sharpness in his eyes betrayed concern. Naomi's hand instinctively moved to cover the mark, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "It's nothing. Just work," she said, her voice a little too steady, too rehearsed. Shungjai didn't press, but his silence was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. He had learned to read evasions, lies and half-truths. Naomi wasn't lying to him, not fully, but there was more than she was telling. That realization tightened something in his chest, a rare vulnerability he seldom allowed to surface. The hotel room, with its opulent furnishings and soft lighting, suddenly felt smaller, constricting. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken tension. Naomi's eyes flickered toward the window, catching the neon glow of the city below, a reminder that life outside their bubble carried threats. Marcus, the past she tried to escape, and choices that could unravel everything. Shungjai moved closer again, the distance between them shrinking with deliberate slowness. Naomi's heartbeat accelerated, a mix of fear and anticipation. She knew that once she let him this close, there would be no turning back, not just from him but from the world he represented. A sudden sharp knock on the suite door jolted them both. Naomi flinched and Shungjai's hand instinctively found hers, gripping lightly, a subtle signal of reassurance. He moved toward the door, tension coiling in his frame like a spring. The knock repeated, louder this time. Shungjai's voice, calm but commanding, called out, "Who is it?" "Room service," a nervous voice replied. He narrowed his eyes slightly but nodded, and the door opened just enough for a tray to be slid inside. Naomi watched him, heart pounding. Every muscle in his body radiated control, authority, and an unspoken readiness for violence if necessary. She had never seen someone so perfectly poised between allure and threat, and she wondered if anyone truly could. Once the door closed, Shungjai returned to her side, his expression unreadable. "Distractions never end," he murmured almost to himself. Naomi felt the tension release slightly as she realized he was speaking to her, not the world. "Why do you stay with me?" she asked softly, words barely audible over the muted city sounds. Shungjai's gaze met hers, unwavering. "Because danger is inevitable. Because desire is inevitable. Because you are inevitable." Naomi's pulse quickened, a shiver running down her spine. She took a slow breath, letting the words sink in, the weight of the night pressing against the walls around them. Outside, sirens continued to wail, the world carrying on in oblivion. Inside, in that moment, nothing else mattered. The soft hum of the city below was a distant echo compared to the storm brewing inside the suite. Naomi sat back, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass, the liquid inside untouched. She knew Shungjai was watching her, and the weight of his gaze was both unsettling and intoxicating. He had that effect on people, an almost magnetic pull, as if he could see into the very core of their being and find every hidden truth. "Tell me something," Naomi said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something real about you, something no one else knows." Shungjai didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a predator observing prey, though not with malice. There was curiosity there, a rare crack in his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. Finally he spoke, voice low, measured. "I have choices," he said. "Every day, every hour. Some are easy, some, not so much. But I've learned that the world doesn't care about the moral lines you draw. It only cares about what you're willing to fight for and what you're willing to risk." Naomi's eyes widened slightly. She had heard whispers about him, about his empire, the precision, the ruthlessness, but hearing it in his voice, seeing the controlled weight behind his words was different. It was one thing to imagine a man as powerful as Shungjai. It was another to feel the truth of it pressing against you, palpable and unyielding. "Risk for what?" she asked, leaning forward despite the unease curling in her stomach. "For people worth keeping," he said, finally letting the hint of a smile touch his lips. "People who matter enough that you can't afford to lose them no matter the cost." The sincerity in his tone was disarming, a stark contrast to the danger she knew always lurked around him. Naomi felt a mix of admiration and fear. Admiration because of the clarity of his convictions, and fear because the stakes in his world were so high, and she was now a part of it. A sudden noise from outside the suite made them both tense, though Shungjai's reaction was slower this time, controlled but alert. The doorman's distant voice, the echo of footsteps in the corridor. It could have been nothing, or it could have been someone looking for trouble. Naomi's heart rate picked up. She wasn't used to this level of constant vigilance. "Do you ever stop?" she asked softly, almost a confession. "Being on guard, controlling everything, anticipating threats?" Shungjai shook his head slightly. "Not really. Control is the only thing that keeps chaos at bay. And trust is earned, not given." His eyes lingered on her, sharp but not unkind. "Which is why I'm cautious with you. And why I'm not leaving you alone tonight." Naomi swallowed, feeling the heat of his words seep into her. The hotel room, luxurious and insulated from the world outside, suddenly felt like a fragile haven. Every decision, every movement carried weight. She had never been someone who courted danger deliberately, yet here she was, drawn into the orbit of a man whose life was a storm. The city lights reflected off the glass windows, casting shifting patterns across the room, almost hypnotic. Naomi stood and moved closer to the window, her reflection superimposed over the night skyline. "It's beautiful," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "But also, terrifying." Shungjai came up behind her, the proximity sending a shiver down her spine. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the presence was enough to make her aware of every nerve, every heartbeat. "Beautiful things often are," he said. "And terrifying things often matter the most." Naomi's hand grazed the glass and Shungjai mirrored her gesture, almost unconsciously. Their reflections merged, blurred by the condensation of the night and the tension between them. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of impending choices. A sudden buzz from his phone broke the quiet. Shungjai glanced at it and frowned. Another call. His expression hardened just slightly, but he ignored it again. Naomi watched him, sensing the conflict beneath the surface. The pull between obligation and desire, duty and temptation. "Someone you can't ignore?" she asked softly. Shungjai's lips tightened just enough for her to notice. "Sometimes ignoring is the only way to maintain control," he said. "And tonight, I need control." The room seemed to constrict further as tension rippled through the air. Naomi felt her pulse spike, both from the closeness and from the anticipation of what was to come. Every glance, every movement between them carried weight, a dangerous dance of desire and restraint. Shungjai finally sat on the edge of the couch, inviting her to join him without a word. Naomi hesitated but eventually moved closer, the heat between them undeniable. Their knees brushed slightly, a small but deliberate contact that made her acutely aware of the unspoken power dynamics. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked, voice low, almost intimate. Naomi met his gaze and for a moment the bravado and danger fell away, leaving only raw vulnerability. I think I do," she admitted, her voice barely audible, almost a confession to herself as much as to him. Shungjai's hand hovered near hers, then brushed it gently. The contact was electric and Naomi felt an involuntary shiver. "Good," he said softly. "Because trust is the only currency that matters here. And right now everything else can wait." The room felt charged, the air thick with tension and unspoken possibilities. Naomi's mind raced, thinking of the life she had left behind, the threats she had escaped, the promises unspoken, and the man beside her who embodied both danger and salvation. Before she could speak again, a sudden pounding on the suite door jolted them both. Naomi flinched and Shungjai's hand immediately went to the door handle, alert, controlled. His entire body tensed, coiled like a spring ready to strike. "Who is it?" Shungjai demanded, voice sharp and commanding. "This is the front desk. Urgent message for the room," came the reply, voice tinged with urgency. Shungjai's eyes narrowed and he gestured for Naomi to stay back. "Stay here," he commanded, voice low but firm. Naomi nodded, heart racing as he moved toward the door with deliberate caution, each step measured, calculated. As he opened the door slightly, his sharp gaze scanned the corridor. A man in a suit held an envelope, extending it cautiously. Shungjai didn't move immediately. Instead he observed, calculating the risk. The man's eyes flickered, betraying nervousness, but there was no immediate threat. Shungjai took the envelope, slipping it into his pocket without breaking eye contact. The man backed away quickly, nodding once, relief evident in his posture before retreating down the corridor. The tension in the room remained, thick and lingering. Shungjai closed the door, leaning back against it for a moment, letting out a slow breath. Naomi moved closer instinctively. "What was that?" she asked, voice tense. "Information," he said simply, tone guarded. "Nothing more. But it reminded me, danger never truly sleeps." Naomi nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. She felt the pull of his world, a storm she had willingly stepped into, knowing there was no turning back. And as she looked into his eyes, she realized the truth she had been avoiding, that desire, danger and trust were all intertwined, and that she was now in the eye of a hurricane she could not escape. The envelope in Shungjai's pocket felt heavier than its size suggested, a quiet reminder that the world outside the hotel suite had not paused for them. Naomi watched him closely, sensing the subtle shift in his posture, the tension that never truly left his shoulders. He always carried the weight of his empire, the power, the danger, the choices that no ordinary person could comprehend. And now she was entangled in it, willingly or not. "I don't like secrets," Naomi said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the city outside. "Not when it feels like the truth could change everything." Shungjai's gaze met hers, dark and unreadable. "Some truths aren't for sharing," he said quietly. "Not because I want to hide from you, but because I need to protect you. You trust me enough to accept that, don't you?" Naomi hesitated, the conflict in her chest pressing against her ribcage. She wanted to know everything about him, about his world, about the choices he made that could destroy or protect her. And yet she had glimpsed the dangers already. The violence, the moral compromises, the shadowed corners where the rules of ordinary life no longer applied. Trusting him meant surrendering, and surrendering meant vulnerability she hadn't felt in years. I want to," she admitted finally, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's not easy." Shungjai's expression softened, just enough to reveal the faintest trace of something almost tender beneath his controlled exterior. He stepped closer, closing the space between them, though not invading it entirely. His hand brushed hers again lightly, sending a spark through her that she could neither control nor ignore. "Nothing worthwhile is ever easy," he murmured. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the faint vibration of the city below. Naomi felt her heart thrum in her chest, aware of the unspoken tension, the electric current that passed between them every time their eyes met. She knew what was coming. The dangerous, thrilling intimacy that always hovered on the edge of their interactions, but part of her was terrified to leap into it fully. Shungjai poured himself another glass of whiskey, his movements deliberate, precise, as though each action had been rehearsed 1,000 times. He handed Naomi a second glass, their fingers brushing briefly, sending another shiver up her spine. "Drink," he said simply, voice low. "To the choices we make, and the consequences we accept." Naomi lifted the glass, watching him closely, feeling the warmth of the liquid as it slid down her throat. The act was mundane, ordinary even, yet in their world, it was charged with intimacy and unspoken meanings. Each gesture between them carried weight, each glance was a negotiation, and every moment held the tension of what could come next. Suddenly, the lights flickered and a soft rumble of electricity echoed through the hotel. Naomi flinched, gripping the glass tightly. Shungjai noticed immediately, stepping closer to shield her instinctively, a protective presence that both comforted and unnerved her. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice barely audible, brushing against her ear. Naomi swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Maybe," she admitted, not entirely lying. "Afraid of everything." Shungjai's hand found hers, interlacing fingers, grounding her. "Good," he murmured. "Fear is clarity. It tells you what matters, what's worth protecting, and what you cannot live without." The storm outside the room seemed to echo the storm inside Naomi's mind. She had stepped into this world seeking excitement, perhaps even a sense of control over her own life, but the reality was far more complex. Shungjai was not just a protector or a lover, he was a force of nature, unpredictable, powerful, and utterly captivating. Before Naomi could speak again, a sharp knock at the suite door broke the fragile calm. Both of them tensed immediately, the years of experience Shungjai carried in handling threats evident in his posture. Naomi instinctively moved back, heart pounding, aware that each knock could herald a world-altering moment. Shungjai moved to the door, his hand resting casually but with lethal precision on the handle. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice commanding, controlled, a subtle warning that he was not to be tested. "This is Detective Chen," came the reply, voice firm but tinged with urgency. "Important, room 906. Naomi's breath hitched. Detective Chen. The law, the moral compass she had once trusted. The man who had always warned her about the consequences of stepping too close to Shungjai's world. Her pulse quickened, the collision of law and desire, danger and protection suddenly tangible. Shungjai's jaw tightened. He opened the door just enough to let the detective slip inside. Naomi watched tense as Chen's eyes flicked over the suite, assessing, calculating. His gaze landed on her, sharp and discerning, before shifting to Shungjai. "We need to talk," Chen said, voice low, urgent. "There's been a development, and it concerns you both." Shungjai's lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded slightly, motioning for Chen to continue. Naomi remained by the window, tense, her body instinctively leaning slightly toward Shungjai for protection. "Your wife," Chen began, "is missing. The hotel staff last saw her a few hours ago. There's a report. She tried to contact you multiple times. No one knows where she is." Naomi's heart dropped. She had seen the brief flashes of Shungjai's life, the consequences of power and choice, but nothing had prepared her for this. She caught Shungjai's eyes, searching for any flicker of emotion, of vulnerability. But his expression was unreadable, a mask of control that belied the storm raging beneath. "What happened?" he asked finally, voice low, carefully measured. Chen hesitated, glancing at Naomi before continuing. "The circumstances are unclear. But she was last seen entering a hotel elevator. Security footage shows nothing afterward. No one has reported seeing her leave. This is serious and the clock is ticking." Shungjai's jaw tightened further. He turned slightly to Naomi, a rare vulnerability passing through his gaze, though quickly masked again by the carefully controlled exterior. "Stay close," he said quietly, almost as a command and a reassurance simultaneously. "No one comes near you tonight. Nothing will touch you. Not while I'm here." Naomi nodded, her hands trembling slightly as the reality of the situation settled over her. This was not just a night of intimacy or danger. It was a collision of worlds, morality, love, and power. And she was now fully enmeshed in the storm. Shungjai moved to the window, surveying the city below, calculating, planning. Naomi watched him, heart in her throat, aware that every decision he made now could mean life or death, not just for his missing wife but for her as well. And in that moment she understood fully what she had willingly stepped into. A life where love and danger were inseparable, where trust and survival were intertwined, and where every choice carried weight far beyond the ordinary. As the night deepened, Naomi felt the pull between fear and desire, between the unknown and the magnetic force of the man beside her. And she realized with a mixture of dread and anticipation that she could no longer turn back. Not from him, not from the world he represented, not from the dangerous allure that had already claimed her heart. The city lights flickered through the tall hotel windows, casting long fractured reflections across the suite. Naomi's mind raced, replaying every word Detective Chen had said. Missing, gone. Last seen in an elevator. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she tried to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was bigger than anything she had anticipated when she first stepped into Shungjai's world. Shungjai stood by the window, fingers pressed against the glass, jaw tight, eyes scanning the streets below. Naomi noticed the tension in his stance, the controlled precision that masked the storm within. He was already calculating, analyzing every possible outcome, every potential lead. And she knew from experience that when Shungjai's mind engaged like this, there was no room for error. "You need to stay calm," he said without turning, voice low but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Panic only leads to mistakes. I will handle this." Naomi's hands clutched the edge of the couch, knuckles white. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice trembling. This is too much." Shungjai finally turned to her, his dark eyes locking with hers. There was no softness here, only a commanding presence that left no room for hesitation. "You can," he said firmly. "Because you have to. Because you're with me now and everything that happens will happen together. You trust me, don't you?" Naomi swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had trusted him before in smaller, intimate moments, but this was different. This was life and death. And yet, despite the fear, she nodded. "I trust you," she whispered. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a brief gesture of tenderness before the cold reality of their situation reclaimed the room. "Good. That will keep you alive," he said almost as a matter of fact, and Naomi shivered at the mix of danger and care in his tone. A sudden vibration of his phone broke the tension. Shungjai glanced at the screen, eyes narrowing. He pocketed it without answering, a subtle signal that the matter would be dealt with on his terms. Naomi noticed the slight tightening of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, and realized that the storm outside the suite was nothing compared to the one brewing within these walls. Shungjai moved toward the door, checking the lock, his every movement precise, deliberate, controlled. Naomi followed instinctively, staying close, aware that her presence was both a comfort to him and a liability. "What are we doing?" she asked softly, barely above a whisper. "Waiting," he said simply, tone flat, but his eyes scanned the hallway like a predator assessing prey. "Gathering information. Planning. Acting too soon can ruin everything." Naomi nodded, though her mind raced with scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. She had stepped into a world of high stakes and dangerous choices, and there was no turning back. Every instinct screamed that she should run, hide, escape, but she couldn't. Not from him, not from the tension, not from the dangerous pull that had ensnared her from the beginning. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. Then another knock, so sudden and forceful that Naomi jumped. Shungjai's hand was on the door handle in an instant, his body coiled like a spring. "Identify yourself," he demanded, voice sharp, authoritative. "This is urgent," came a strained voice. "Please, room 906. It's about her." Shungjai's eyes darkened. He opened the door slightly, revealing a young man in a hotel uniform, face pale and anxious, holding a folded note. "Go ahead," Shungjai said, voice measured, eyes piercing. The young man extended the note. "Found this slipped under the elevator door, sir. It was addressed to your suite." Shungjai took the note, scanning the contents with a practiced eye. Naomi could see the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his shoulders, the narrowing of his eyes. Something in the message had struck a chord. He pocketed the note without a word, motioning the young man to leave. Once the door closed, Shungjai's gaze met Naomi's. "She's alive," he said quietly. "For now. But someone knows she's important to me, and they're using that, testing boundaries." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "Who would do this?" she asked, voice barely audible. Shungjai's expression remained unreadable. "Enemies, opportunists, people who underestimate the consequences of touching what belongs to me," he said. "But don't worry. She'll be found. And anyone who thinks otherwise will regret it." The intensity in his tone sent a shiver down Naomi's spine. She had seen his capacity for violence before, glimpsed the controlled ruthlessness that made him untouchable. And now it was no longer hypothetical. The stakes were real, immediate, and terrifying. A sudden idea struck Naomi, and she hesitated before speaking. What if I can help?" she asked carefully. "I know things, places, people, small details you might not consider. Maybe I could." Shungjai tilted his head slightly, regarding her. "You?" he asked, tone incredulous but not unkind. "This isn't a game, Naomi. Every move is life or death." "I know," she said firmly, heart pounding. "But I want to do something. I can't just wait here. I can't be helpless." Shungjai studied her, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You have courage," he said, voice low, almost a murmur. "And recklessness. That combination can be deadly, for you and others." Naomi nodded, determined. "I'd rather face the danger than stand aside." Shungjai's eyes lingered on her, dark and calculating. After a long moment he finally said, "Very well. But you follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation. One mistake and we both pay the price." Naomi swallowed hard, the reality of the situation pressing down on her chest. She nodded. "I understand." Shungjai reached out, brushing her hair from her face again, lingering just long enough to make her pulse spike. "Good. Then stay close. Watch and learn. And remember, trust is everything." Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the storm of danger and desire that had taken over Suite 906. Naomi felt the pull of adrenaline and anticipation, knowing that the next steps would define everything. Her safety, her loyalty, and the dangerous, intoxicating bond that had grown between her and Shungjai. As the night deepened, Shungjai began outlining a plan, his voice steady, precise, commanding. Naomi listened intently, absorbing every instruction, every detail, every nuance. She realized that trust was not just an abstract concept here. It was survival intertwined with desire, power, and the ever-present danger that surrounded them. And as the first hints of dawn began to creep over the city skyline, Naomi understood something fundamental. There was no going back. Not from him, not from the storm, not from the life she had chosen to step into. And somewhere deep inside, amidst fear and uncertainty, she felt a thrill unlike any other. A dangerous, intoxicating certainty that she belonged in this world, at least for tonight, at Shungjai's side. By mid-morning, the suite felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tense command center. Naomi moved silently around the room, trying to absorb every instruction Shungjai had given her. Each detail mattered, the timing, the signals, the people involved. One wrong move could cost lives. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, focusing on the rhythm of his voice as he laid out the plan. "We'll start by confirming her last known location," Shungjai said, voice low, clipped, authoritative. "Security footage, hotel staff statements, every detail. Then we move. Fast. Precise. No room for error." Naomi nodded, heart pounding. "And if someone's watching us?" Shungjai's gaze met hers, sharp and unyielding. "Then they'll regret it," he said simply. There was no threat in the words, no overt anger. Just the certainty of a man who had survived countless battles. A man for whom failure was not an option. Naomi felt both reassured and terrified. She followed him as he gathered his essentials, each movement deliberate. Black coat, blue jeans, polished shoes. Shungjai looked calm, composed, almost casual. But Naomi knew better. Beneath the surface was a storm, controlled but lethal, a predator ready to strike. They exited the suite, descending the hotel staircase to avoid unnecessary attention. Naomi kept close, her eyes scanning the surroundings, heart racing as adrenaline surged. Every glance, every passing figure could conceal danger. She realized fully now that Shungjai's life was a constant negotiation with risk, and she was stepping deeper into it with every heartbeat. Once they reached the lobby, Shungjai signaled to a sleek black car waiting discreetly near the valet. Naomi noticed the tinted windows and the quiet authority in the way the driver moved, understanding immediately that this was not just transportation. It was a mobile safe zone. "Get in," Shungjai said, voice controlled but commanding. Naomi obeyed, sliding into the back seat beside him. The car door closed with a soft thud, sealing them off from the world outside. Shungjai's phone buzzed again. He ignored it, but Naomi saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the subtle tension in his eyes. Whoever was trying to reach him was being blocked by choice, and she realized that in his world, ignoring a call could be as dangerous as answering it. The city passed by in a blur outside the tinted windows, the morning light reflecting off skyscrapers and traffic. Naomi's thoughts were chaotic, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something else she couldn't quite name. Desire, perhaps, intertwined with respect and awe for the man beside her. He was commanding, dangerous, irresistible. Shungjai finally spoke, breaking the tense silence. "We need to be methodical," he said, tone low, almost intimate. "Every action, every decision, every movement counts. One misstep and it could end badly." Naomi nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. I'll follow your lead." The car slowed as they approached the first location, a hotel several blocks away from the city center. Shungjai's eyes scanned the area, taking in the entrances, exits, and the flow of people. Naomi felt a jolt of fear. She knew this was no ordinary search. This was a dangerous game, and every detail could mean the difference between life and death. Shungjai exited first, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. Naomi followed, careful to maintain a low profile. As they approached the hotel lobby, Naomi noticed the subtle glances of staff and guests, the quiet tension that seemed to ripple through the air. She realized that in Shungjai's world, even ordinary places could become stages for danger. "Split," Shungjai said quietly, nodding toward two elevators. "You take the left. Watch. Observe. Don't engage unless necessary." Naomi's heart raced. She had never imagined herself in a scenario like this. Spying, calculating, alert to every possible threat. Yet under Shungjai's guidance she felt a strange mixture of fear and empowerment. She wasn't just a bystander. She was participating, contributing, and surviving. The elevator ride felt interminable. Naomi pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, eyes scanning the floors as the numbers ticked upward. Every stop, every ping of the elevator was a potential moment of danger. She felt the weight of responsibility. One mistake and it could cost lives, including her own. When the elevator reached the designated floor, Naomi stepped out cautiously, her senses heightened. The hallway was quiet, almost eerily so, but she could feel the undercurrent of tension, the unspoken threat lurking in shadows. Shungjai's words echoed in her mind. Methodical, precise, control. She approached the end of the hallway, where the elevator's security footage had indicated movement. A faint noise, metal against tile, caught her attention. She froze, listening. Her breath was shallow, controlled, and she realized that every instinct was screaming for her to act carefully, strategically. Shungjai appeared beside her, silent and imposing, his presence grounding yet charged with danger. He gestured toward a door slightly ajar. "Inside," he whispered. "Careful. Watch for traps. And remember, she's alive, but we don't know for how long." Naomi nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Together they entered, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The room was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls. And then a movement. A subtle shift in the corner where a figure crouched, barely visible in the darkness. Naomi's heart leapt. She recognized the figure instantly. It was her, the woman who had vanished, trembling but unharmed, clutching something small and precious to her chest. Relief washed over Naomi in an instant, but it was short-lived. Shungjai's instincts flared as he noticed the faint glint of a weapon concealed near the doorway. "Stay behind me," he commanded, voice low, lethal. Naomi obeyed instinctively, the trust she had placed in him cemented by moments like this. Shungjai stepped forward, every movement controlled, precise, and the tension in the air thickened as the potential threat became tangible. A muffled sound, almost a whisper, drew Naomi's attention. Someone else was in the room. Someone dangerous. Her pulse quickened, fear and adrenaline mixing into a potent cocktail. She watched as Shungjai moved, fluid and silent, toward the source of the threat, eyes dark, body coiled like a spring ready to strike. Time seemed to slow. Naomi's chest tightened, every nerve in her body screaming for her to stay calm, to observe, to trust him. She felt the electricity in the air, the almost tangible danger pressing in from all sides. And in that moment she realized fully, this was what it meant to live in his world. Thrilling, terrifying, intoxicating and impossible to resist. Shungjai moved with lethal precision, his presence commanding the dimly lit room. Naomi stayed just behind him, her breath shallow, body coiled with adrenaline. Every instinct screamed that a single misstep could spell disaster, and yet, there was a strange exhilaration coursing through her. She had never felt so alive, so acutely aware of danger and desire entwined in the same moment. The figure in the corner shifted, revealing a man's outline. A gun glinted faintly in the light, a signal that this was no ordinary confrontation. Shungjai's eyes narrowed, calculating every possible angle, every potential threat. His movements were silent but deadly, a predator closing in with controlled intent. "Don't move," Shungjai commanded, voice low, velvet smooth but edged with authority. The man froze, tension radiating from him in waves, and Naomi felt the room shrink around them, every second stretched taut with imminent action. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She had seen Shungjai handle threats before, but this was different. Immediate, dangerous and raw. She gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, every fiber of her being alert. The woman they had come to rescue remained frozen, clutching a small bundle close to her chest, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Shungjai's gaze never wavered. Every movement was calculated, controlled. Slowly he advanced, each step silent, precise. Naomi followed, instinctively matching his pace, the trust she had in him solidified by countless small moments of guidance and protection. "Who sent you?" Shungjai's voice was steady, lethal in its calm. The man's eyes darted, searching for escape, calculating odds. He realized quickly that escape was impossible. Shungjai's presence dominated the room, a storm contained in human form. I was told to watch," the man stammered, voice shaking. "To make sure she didn't leave. I wasn't supposed to hurt anyone." Shungjai's eyes darkened, the shadow of anger crossing his face, subtle but unmistakable. "You should have thought about the consequences," he said slowly, deliberately. "You're in my world now. One wrong choice and it doesn't end with you." Naomi's chest tightened as she watched the tension in his shoulders, the lethal calm in his eyes. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear alone, but from the raw intensity that surrounded him. Every moment with Shungjai was charged, dangerous, intoxicating. The man dropped the gun, hands raised, trembling. Shungjai's presence remained a barrier, a warning that any further movement could provoke irreversible consequences. Naomi felt a surge of relief for the woman, but she knew the danger was far from over. The threat had been neutralized, but the storm of consequences, the ripple effects, would follow them. Shungjai turned to Naomi, eyes softening just slightly. "Stay close," he said quietly, almost a murmur, a rare moment of tenderness amidst the storm. Naomi nodded, heart pounding, her trust in him unwavering even in the face of danger. The woman they had rescued clutched the small bundle to her chest, trembling. Shungjai stepped closer, his presence both protective and commanding. "It's okay," he said, voice low, reassuring. "You're safe now. Nothing will touch you while I'm here." Naomi felt the pull of the moment, the weight of adrenaline mixing with desire. She had seen this side of him before, protective, intense, commanding, but the intimacy of it, the quiet care beneath the dangerous exterior, sent a shiver down her spine. She was drawn to him inexorably, aware of the tension between fear and desire that defined every interaction with him. "Who are you?" Naomi asked the rescued woman softly, voice gentle, calming. The woman looked at her, eyes wide, voice shaking. My name is Hannah," she whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I thought they were going to." Shungjai's hand rested lightly on Naomi's shoulder, a subtle reminder to maintain control, to stay focused. Naomi felt a strange comfort in his touch, the quiet authority that radiated from him. She nodded, understanding the unspoken instruction to remain calm, composed, and ready for what came next. Shungjai turned his attention back to the man who had held the gun. "You will leave this city immediately," he said, voice lethal in its calm. "And if I ever see you again, it won't end well. Understand?" The man nodded frantically, fear evident in every movement. Shungjai's eyes followed him as he backed away, trembling, before disappearing into the hallway. The room fell silent, the tension slowly releasing like a drawn breath. Naomi exhaled, her heart still racing, aware that the storm was far from over. She turned to Hannah, offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," she said softly. "We're here to help." Shungjai's presence loomed behind them, protective, unwavering. Naomi felt the weight of his attention, the quiet intensity that always accompanied him. She realized that being near him was like standing on the edge of a precipice. Terrifying, thrilling, impossible to ignore. As they led Hannah back to the car, Naomi walked beside Shungjai, attuned to every movement, every shift in the air. The city streets stretched out before them, bustling and oblivious, unaware of the storm that had just unfolded. Naomi felt a surge of adrenaline, excitement, and fear, all mixed with an undeniable attraction to the man beside her. Shungjai opened the car door for Hannah, helping her inside with care and precision. Naomi followed, sliding into the seat next to him. The quiet hum of the engine filled the car, the tension in the room replaced by a tense anticipation of what lay ahead. "Where to now?" Naomi asked softly, voice tentative, aware of the delicate balance between danger and desire. Shungjai's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, yet there was a subtle warmth beneath the controlled exterior. "We regroup," he said simply. "Assess, plan, and act. One step at a time. Every detail matters." Naomi nodded, heart pounding, aware that every moment with him was a lesson in trust, control, and survival. She had entered this world seeking excitement, but she realized now that it demanded more than curiosity. It demanded courage, intelligence, and an unwavering bond with the man who controlled the storm. The city passed by in silence, the tension lingering, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Naomi felt the thrill of danger, the pull of desire, and the weight of responsibility all at once. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the storm was far from over. But she also knew with an undeniable certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, beside Shungjai, in the eye of a hurricane that promised both peril and passion. The car rolled through the city streets, the low hum of the engine filling the tense silence. Naomi sat beside Shungjai, her hands folded in her lap, heart still racing from the encounter at the hotel. Hannah was quietly seated behind them, clutching the small bundle she had protected so fiercely. Every mile they drove reminded Naomi that nothing in this world was ordinary. Even survival came wrapped in danger and uncertainty. Shungjai's eyes were fixed on the road, calculating, scanning, always alert. Naomi could sense the intensity in his muscles, the controlled tension in his posture. There was no room for distraction, not now, not ever. She realized once again that being with him meant navigating a constant edge between fear and desire, chaos and control. "We'll need to find a safe place for Hannah," Shungjai said, voice low, almost intimate, though still carrying that edge of command. "Somewhere discreet, secure, someone she can trust." Naomi nodded, absorbing every word. Do you trust anyone for that?" she asked cautiously, aware of the delicate balance in his world. Shungjai's gaze flicked briefly toward her. "Trust is earned," he said, tone flat but deliberate. "And she doesn't have much time to waste. Every second counts." The car turned down a quieter street, the urban chaos fading into the background, replaced by the muted hum of residential buildings and shaded alleyways. Naomi's mind raced, thinking of the countless scenarios, the variables, the unknown threats that lurked around every corner. And yet, amidst the fear and anticipation, there was a pull toward Shungjai, a magnetic, undeniable force that left her breathless and aware of every heartbeat. A sudden vibration in his phone drew Shungjai's attention, but he ignored it again, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Naomi noticed the subtle shift in his jaw, the tightening of his grip on the steering wheel. Whoever was calling had been denied before. This was a battle of control, a quiet war of influence and attention. And Shungjai was always in command. "Are you scared?" Naomi asked softly, her voice hesitant. She wasn't sure if she wanted the answer, but the question had to be asked. Shungjai's eyes flicked toward her, dark and unreadable, yet there was a trace of vulnerability in the corner of his gaze. "Fear is necessary," he said finally, voice low, deliberate. "It keeps you alert, focused, alive. But it cannot control you. That is the difference between survival and failure." Naomi swallowed hard, absorbing his words. She felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. He was dangerous, yes, but he was also the anchor in the chaos, the force that could navigate them through the storm. Her trust in him, tentative at first, had grown into something unshakable. And yet the fear remained, a constant reminder of how fragile their situation truly was. The car stopped at a discreet parking garage. Shungjai motioned for Naomi to stay close. "Stay quiet, follow my lead," he instructed. Naomi nodded, instinctively moving with him as he stepped out, Hannah following silently behind. The garage was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, creating pockets of uncertainty. Every echo of footsteps or distant sound felt magnified, each one a potential threat. Naomi's pulse quickened, adrenaline sharp in her veins. She kept close to Shungjai, feeling the protective force of his presence like a tangible barrier against the unknown. Shungjai led them to a nondescript car parked in the corner, keys in hand. "This will take us to a safe house," he said, voice low, controlled. "Somewhere no one will find her until we can plan the next move." Naomi climbed in beside Hannah, watching Shungjai take the driver's seat. The silence in the car was thick with tension, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. Naomi felt her heart pounding not just from fear, but from the intense closeness of Shungjai. The air between them seemed to vibrate, a silent electricity that made it impossible to ignore the pull she felt toward him. Hannah finally spoke, voice trembling. I don't know why they took me, why they threatened me," her words trailed off, fear evident in her eyes. Naomi reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "You're safe now," she said gently. "We won't let anything happen to you." Shungjai's eyes flicked to them in the rearview mirror, dark and unreadable. "Safe doesn't mean without risk," he said quietly. "It means I control the danger. And I don't fail." Naomi felt the weight of his words, the subtle intensity in his voice, and she realized how completely entwined their lives had become. Danger, trust, desire, they were all bound together in an intricate, unbreakable pattern. And the deeper she stepped into his world, the more she understood that every choice carried consequences beyond imagination. The car wound through the city streets, taking them further from the hotel, further from the uncertainty of immediate danger. Naomi's eyes flicked to Shungjai repeatedly, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel, and the quiet focus in his eyes. He was always in control, yet the shadow of concern, the hint of human vulnerability, made her pulse quicken. Finally they arrived at a secluded house, hidden behind trees and high walls. Shungjai parked, motioning for Naomi and Hannah to stay inside the car while he checked the perimeter. Naomi's hands were clammy, but she followed instructions, heart thundering in her chest. Every instinct screamed that this was still dangerous, yet the presence of Shungjai beside her, commanding, vigilant, made her feel a strange sense of safety. After a tense few minutes, Shungjai returned, signaling for them to follow. The house was secure, a temporary sanctuary for Hannah. Naomi helped settle her into a room, ensuring she had everything she needed. Hannah's eyes were wide, fear still evident, but Naomi offered a smile, reassurance and warmth. When they returned to the main living area, Naomi and Shungjai found themselves alone for the first time in hours. The tension in the room was palpable, a mix of relief, adrenaline, and an unspoken attraction that had only intensified over the past night. Naomi turned to him, words catching in her throat. You were incredible, she said softly, voice barely audible. I don't know how you do it, stay so calm, so in control. Shungjai's eyes darkened, gaze intense as he stepped closer, the air between them charged. Control is everything, he said low, deliberate. But trust, courage, that's what keeps you alive. You surprised me tonight. You kept up. And that matters. Naomi felt a shiver run down her spine, the proximity of him overwhelming. She wanted to speak, to confess the pull she felt toward him, but words failed her. Instead she let the silence stretch, letting the tension, the desire, the dangerous intimacy speak for itself. Shungjai's hand brushed hers briefly, a fleeting contact charged with electricity. Naomi's breath caught, aware of the danger, the desire, the unspoken bond between them. He leaned slightly closer, the intensity of his gaze holding her captive. Tonight was only the beginning, he murmured, voice low, intimate, yet edged with authority. The storm isn't over. And neither is the danger. But neither is the connection between us. Naomi's chest tightened, pulse racing. She had known deep down that her life had changed irrevocably. And now, standing at the edge of fear and desire, she understood fully, there was no turning back. Not from him, not from the storm, not from the life she had chosen willingly at Shungjai's side. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Naomi sat beside Shungjai, heart still racing from the tension of the past hours. Hannah was resting in the other room, finally able to breathe after the whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Naomi's thoughts, however, were far from settled. Danger still lingered outside these walls, and she knew that in Shungjai's world, safety was always temporary. Shungjai stood near the window, fingers pressed lightly against the glass. His eyes were dark, scanning the surrounding streets, calculating, always vigilant. Naomi felt the pull of his presence, the same commanding force that had both terrified and captivated her since the beginning. There was no denying it, he was magnetic, dangerous, and utterly compelling. I need to know, Naomi said softly, breaking the silence. After all that, after everything, what happens next? What do we do now? Shungjai's gaze flicked toward her, unreadable, yet there was a trace of warmth beneath the controlled exterior. We act, he said simply. Carefully. Precisely. But we do not let fear control us. Not now, not ever. We protect what matters and eliminate what threatens it. Naomi nodded, absorbing his words. She had learned a harsh truth in the past hours. His world was relentless, unforgiving, and morally gray. But she also understood that in his world, there was a code, a strict, unyielding sense of loyalty, protection, and authority. She wanted to be part of that code, to stand beside him even if it meant stepping into danger herself. Shungjai moved closer, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. You understand, he said low, deliberate, that being with me means living on the edge. Fear, desire, danger, they are intertwined. You cannot have one without the others. And I cannot promise safety, only that I will protect you as I always do. Naomi's chest tightened, her pulse quickening. I understand, she whispered, voice trembling but firm. And I want to be with you, even if it's dangerous. A fleeting softness crossed Shungjai's face, a rare vulnerability that he quickly masked. He reached out, brushing her hair from her face, and the touch sent a shiver down Naomi's spine. It was intimate, protective, and thrilling, all at once. She leaned slightly into him, drawn to the dangerous, magnetic force that had captivated her from the start. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the street outside. A car door slamming, footsteps on pavement. Shungjai's body tensed instantly, every muscle coiled, eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat. Naomi felt her heart leap into her throat. The danger was never truly gone. It had simply shifted, waiting for the right moment to strike. Shungjai moved swiftly, opening the door and peering out. Naomi followed cautiously, aware that every second now could determine their survival. A black sedan waited a few feet away, engine running, lights off. The silhouettes of two figures could be seen moving purposefully toward the house. "They're here," Shungjai muttered, voice low, lethal. "Stay behind me." Naomi's breath caught, a mix of fear and exhilaration flooding her system. She followed him instinctively, trusting his every move. Shungjai's presence was commanding, protective, and yet intoxicating. She had never felt anything like it, a blend of desire, fear, and unshakable trust that tethered her to him completely. The figures approached cautiously, unaware that their target was already prepared. Shungjai moved with fluid precision, every step measured, every movement silent. Naomi stayed close, feeling the electricity in the air, the tension that made her pulse race and her senses sharpen. A sudden noise, a dropped object, a misstep, triggered the confrontation. Shungjai reacted instantly, a blur of motion neutralizing the threat with controlled precision. Naomi watched, heart racing, as danger was eliminated as quickly as it had arrived. The adrenaline surged, leaving her breathless, her body trembling from the intensity of the moment. Once the figures were incapacitated, Shungjai turned to Naomi, eyes dark, unreadable, yet softened by relief. "It's done," he said quietly. "For now." Naomi exhaled, feeling the weight of the tension slowly release. "You're incredible," she murmured, voice trembling with a mix of awe and admiration. "How do you stay so calm, so in control?" Shungjai stepped closer, hand brushing hers lightly. "Control is everything," he said low, deliberate. "But trust, courage, that is what matters most. You showed both tonight. That matters." Naomi felt a shiver run through her, the intensity of his gaze, the subtle intimacy of his touch, making her pulse spike. She realized fully now that she was irrevocably drawn to him, not just for the protection he offered but for the force, the magnetism, the dangerous allure that defined him. Shungjai's lips brushed hers in a fleeting, electrifying kiss. It was soft, deliberate, yet charged with desire, protection, and unspoken promises. Naomi's breath caught, heart racing as the tension, fear, and desire merged into an undeniable connection. Pulling back slightly, Shungjai's eyes darkened, intense and unwavering. "This world, my life, it's not for the faint of heart," he said quietly. "But you're stronger than I anticipated. And that makes you dangerous. In a good way." Naomi smiled faintly, trembling slightly, aware of the storm of emotions coursing through her. "I don't care," she whispered. "I want this, even if it's dangerous. Even if it's impossible." Shungjai's expression softened just a fraction. "Then we face it together," he said, voice low, deliberate, intimate. "Whatever comes, whatever storms arrive, we face it as one. No hesitation, no fear. Only us." Naomi felt the finality and certainty of his words sink in. This was not just desire or infatuation. It was a bond forged through danger, trust, and unshakable intensity. She leaned into him, feeling the electricity of the moment, the thrilling, terrifying exhilaration of being fully entwined in his world. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the storm that had raged and been contained within the walls of this secluded house. Naomi understood now that her life had changed irrevocably. There was no turning back. Fear, desire, danger, and trust were intertwined, binding her to Shungjai in ways she could not resist and would not want to resist. And as the sun began to rise, casting pale light over the quiet streets, Naomi realized fully that she had chosen to step into the storm, to embrace the danger, and to surrender her heart to the man who had captivated it completely. For better or worse, there was no going back.